Good afternoon and welcome to Include NYC Live. Include NYC, my name is Kpoto and I'm a family educator here at Include NYC. I am also the parent of a 9-year-old boy who's on the autism spectrum. It's been quite a while since he had to go through this transition from early intervention to preschool special education. So I'm really excited to be able to share some information with other parents who are going through this transition. Here with me is Marilyn Rubinstein. She's the director for the Manhattan Early Childhood Direction Center at New York Presbyterian. Welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you, Kpana. I'm very, very happy to be here. And I'm just going to mention what the Early Childhood Direction Centers are. We are funded by the New York State Education Department, and we've been in this business for the past 40 years to provide neutral information, referral, and support to families and professionals about any type of service for a child below age 5 who has either a known or a suspected developmental delay or disability. There are 9 ECDCs around the state, and then there are 5 ECDCs in New York City, 1 in each borough. I'm at the ECDC in Manhattan at New York Presbyterian Hospital, and I'm really glad to be here to talk with you and to get information out to as many families as we can.
Okay, great. So before we start, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Include NYC Live is one of a series of live streams that we do on the third Thursday of every month. They last for about 60 minutes, so we're going to try to keep this right under 60 minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to use our chat box. We're also going to have a packet that's going to be going out. Everyone who registered should have received it. That gives you the PowerPoint and just some additional information on preschool special education and this transition. So let's get started. So the topic here today is the transition from early intervention to preschool special education services and overview for families. So when we talk about transition pretty much means the passage from one form, state, style, or place to another. So now we're going to go over the steps to support transition. For all children receiving early intervention services, you're going to get a transition plan, or you should have a transition plan. If a parent is interested in preschool special education, here are some of the things that they're going to have to go through. Can you go over that a little bit, Marilyn?
I will, and I'm going to read through this very quickly now, and then we're going to hit on each of these in a little more detail. Right. And these are the order that they go in: notification, transition conference, referral, the family's consent for the evaluation, and then the evaluation, which will lead to the eligibility determination.
Right. Okay. All right. So we have some important terms here. IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. FAPE, Free and Appropriate Public Education. This is something that every parent of a child receiving special education should be aware of. The Least Restrictive Environment, or LRE, and Marilyn is going to describe what this means a little bit later. Then there's also the Individualized Family Service Plan. So if your child is receiving early intervention, they should have an IFSP. And then when they transition to preschool special education, they'll have an IEP, which is the Individualized Education Program.
Okay. So I just want people to understand that how early intervention works and then how it works with preschool. So EI is regulated by the New York State Department of Education. It's administered locally by the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. There's an early intervention or regional office in each borough, and every family is then assigned to a regional early intervention official designee, which is known as the EIOD. And then each family also has an early intervention service coordinator. There's a lot of alphabet soup in this,
definitely.
So we wanted to spell it out for families,
Right.
and you'll have the PowerPoint so it'll be clear. The next slide is a similar framework, but talks about preschool special ed, which is regulated by the New York State Education Department, administered by the New York City Department of Education. There are 10 regional committees on special education, and each one includes a committee on preschool special education. And then there are the CPSE administrators, who is the Department of Education professional who is overseeing the process for the evaluation and eligibility determination for your child. it's a little confusing because it's a committee that
Right.
makes the determination, and we'll go through later on who the members are. It's not just one person, it's not just the CPSE administrator. So I just want to let people know about that one.
Okay, so before we get into this, Marilyn, I want to ask you, when should parents start thinking about the transition from EI to preschool special ed?
I know it sounds funny to say this to parents of such young children, but the child's second birthday is really the time when families need to start thinking about transition. And that will be a little clearer later when we talk about what the different steps are and the different timelines. But around the child's second birthday, it's particularly hard for families whose kids may just be beginning EI around the second birthday.
Right.
So if your child is just starting to get early intervention services, you also need to think about what comes next, even before you know what they're going to need. Mm-hmm. And actually, this conversation should happen at the IFSP meeting, at the Individualized Family Service Plan meeting around your child's second birthday. There should be a conversation with you and all of the people who are providing services for your child, and that plan should be documented within the IFSP, including the supports and services that you may need leading up to transition, you and your child. So if you have a child around age 2 and you have an IFSP and you have a minute to spare, which I know most of you don't, take a look at the IFSP to see if there is a transition plan in there.
Okay. So who can parents start communicating with about this transition?
Our feeling is, first of all, you're going to have that conversation with the actual, what EI calls interventionists, the people coming into your home working with your child. And you should also discuss your child's strengths and areas of concern with anybody else who has a major focus in your child's life. If your child has a babysitter, you can have the conversation with them. If your child, you can touch base with your child's pediatrician or any other medical professional that might be touching your child's life. Have their sense of where they can envision your child going forward.
So I know this transitions, sometimes it can be very overwhelming for parents. Can you give some examples of some of the changes that parents can expect when their child is in preschool special education?
We're going to talk about that now. While this is all based on the same federal law, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, early intervention is based on a child's developmental need. Preschool special education services are based on a child's educational needs in the context of the areas of development that you see on the screen. So preschool is education, not necessarily developmental. Most preschool special education services will be delivered in a center-based location. Could be an early childhood classroom.
Right.
It could be a preschool special ed program. It will not be home-based for the most part. EI is generally home-based these days, probably even a little different from when your son was. But for the most part, it's home-based with a small percentage of kids getting home-based and center-based services.
Okay.
School age is a school year calendar. Preschool is a school year calendar. EI is a full year calendar. And the one piece that I want to make sure parents understand, once a child qualifies for preschool services, the child will receive a classification as a preschool student with a disability. Mm-hmm. Under EI, it was a developmental delay. And one of the biggest changes for families, there is no longer a service coordinator in the next system.
Right. So you're pretty much not going to have someone holding your hand every step of the way like you did in early intervention. So that can be a big adjustment.
Right. But remember, there's people like us
who can help
definitely. And also be a virtual handhold.
Exactly.
So
definitely.
we can do that.
So Marilyn just mentioned delays, right? So this current slide talks about some of the delays. And preschool special education services and supports will address documented delays in one or more of 5 areas. So these are the 5 areas.
And these are the same areas for early intervention.
Right.
And the amount of delay a child needs to be eligible in preschool is the same percentage of delay as early intervention, but it's a different system.
All right, so let's move right along.
Okay.
Can you explain the early intervention age out dates? Because I know there's a lot of timelines and dates when it comes to this transition, which can be confusing for parents.
It can be really confusing, and it's confusing for professionals as well. And in my office, we spend a good part of every day explaining this and talking to families about it. But I really want to go over this carefully and slowly in detail so parents understand. Children will age out of early intervention the day before their third birthday. Okay? Your child's current IFSP's end date, if your child is over 2, the end date will be the day before the third birthday.
Okay.
But there are ways to extend services past the third birthday. If the parent refers their child to the local Committee on Preschool Special Education for a referral and evaluation, and the CPSE process is completed before the child's third birthday, and the child is eligible, they can extend to certain dates. But if the parent refers their child to CPSE and the process to determine eligibility is not completed by the third birthday, for whatever reason, the services for EI will end the day before the third birthday. Okay. So we always really want parents to understand that. And I'm just looking at my notes because I don't want to forget anything. This is why we mentioned that transition conversation should start around the child's second birthday, because we want parents to be aware of when their child will age out of EI, when their child might be first age eligible for preschool. I think that's the next slide, actually.
Let's move on.
Okay, so
Yes.
age eligible for preschool.
Yes.
So children who turn 3 between January 1st and June 30th are first age eligible for preschool special education services on January 2nd of the year they turn 3.
Okay.
Kids who are born later in the year, those born between July 1st and December 31st, are first age eligible for preschool special ed services on July 1st of the year they turn 3. So we want parents to really go through this so they understand what the timeline is going to be. First age eligibility, last age eligibility for early intervention, and we want parents to really plan accordingly. So what parents need to understand is that kids are first age eligible at this time, but a referral can be made 4 months before age eligibility to determine if the child is eligible for preschool and to allow enough time.
Okay.
So that's a really important piece.
And one thing I want to point out, so I know Marilyn has gone over a lot of dates and
Yeah.
timelines and things that you have to keep track of. The New York State Education website has a really handy calculator that you can just plug in your child's birthday and it will tell you all the dates when different things need to happen. So I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's the EI to Preschool Special Education calculator. Just plug in your child's birthday and it'll give you all the different dates, and that can help you to keep track. And
Right.
we have that in our resource packet as well.
Yeah,
We
and
have
it's
a link.
also, it's on the PowerPoint.
It's on- okay, great.
There's a link on the PowerPoint,
Okay.
so you can
Great.
find that pretty easily.
Okay. So we had talked about CPSC, right? And who parents can contact if they're having a hard time reaching their CPSC admin. Can you give some information
Sure.
about
I
that?
think
ma'am?
that one thing to just frame this for families, and there's about 10 to 15,000 kids who turn 3 who are getting EI services every year who are moving through the process.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of kids churning through. So while your child is the primary concern for you, and you expect when you make a phone call, you'll get your call back immediately,
Right.
when there's lots of kids, it doesn't happen as quickly as possible. So if you're having trouble reaching the CPSE administrator, you sort of go up the chain of command, like with everything.
Right.
Everybody has a boss.
Right,
So you would
exactly.
contact this, some of us don't like to think that, but we all do.
We all have a boss.
You would contact the CSE chairperson, the Committee on Special Education chairperson, and let them know that you've been trying to contact the CPSE administrator, and that's not helpful. There are very specific timelines that need to be followed, so you want to be aware of those timelines.
Okay.
And then I think we also included other places families could contact for help as they go along.
Right, and you can definitely call us at INCLUDEnyc. I'm going to share the helpline card at the end, and Marilyn, you can also definitely contact the ECDC, Manhattan ECDC, or any of the other ECDCs.
The ECDC in the
city.
borough where you live.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
And we'll go through that towards the end so you have that information.
Okay, so let's talk about the early intervention age out determination dates.
So this is really interesting, and this can be tricky for some families. So a child can continue to receive EI services past their third birthday if the CPSE, if the Committee on Preschool Special Ed, of which you as a parent are a member of, and we'll go through the members in a minute, if the CPSE determines before the child's birthday that the child meets the eligibility criteria to receive preschool special ed services. Okay? If the CPSE determines that your child is not eligible for preschool special ed services, your child's early intervention services will end the day before the third birthday.
So can you talk a little bit about why it may be hard for parents to be able to get services and placement for their child between January and June and that whole timeline?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that happens is preschool is a school-age system. And when does school begin?
Right.
In September.
Right.
There's the most availability of service providers in September. There's the most availability of seats in schools. That's when, if your child is going to a Head Start program or a nursery school or in childcare, it's the beginning of the school year.
Right.
If a family opts to wait till the very end, I think, is it the next slide that has the dates? Right.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go with that one. So for those kids who were born between January 1st and August 31st, okay, they can remain in early intervention until August 31st of the year their child turns 3, which is great timing. It's the beginning of the school year. School starts in September. Those youngest kids, the ones born between September 1st and December 31st, can remain in early intervention until December 31st of the year they turn 3. However, if the family opts to do that, that's fine. My job, as I see it in other places, is to let families know that if they wait, they might have difficulty securing preschool services. And that could be an individual decision that a family makes. However, those same really young kids, they were first eligible for preschool services in July. So we know that those kids could start preschool in September as well if they're eligible. So we like to see every child be referred in enough time to make that transition for September. It just makes sense with the system.
Right.
Again, it's hard if you're just coming in and your child right now is turning 3 in December and you're just starting the EI process and now you have to do preschool. But that's the kind of decision we're happy at the Early Childhood Direction Centers to talk to you about because it's individual.
Right. And I just want to share a little bit of a personal story. I know Marilyn has mentioned a couple of times about some parents who have kids who may be 2 and just starting, and that's actually when my son started getting early intervention at 2. And I just have to say that by the time it was time for him to transition, we didn't have many choices as far as preschools. In fact, the service coordinator just told us there's one school that has a spot, and that's the school that we went with.
Yeah. So,
I mean, everything ended up being okay, but, I wish I had known there were other choices back then.
Yeah, well, I wish you had spoken to us or somebody here, right?
Right.
But I think it's all a matter of what works for a child and a child in the context of the family.
Right.
So that's all we just want to be sure of.
Okay, so before we get into the slide, we have talked about preschool special education, but I would like you to talk a little bit about pre-K for all and some of the options that are available for children transitioning to preschool special ed.
Pre-K for all, I mean, you can't ride on the subway or ride on a bus.
There's signs everywhere.
There's a sign every place where you're walking about New York City's universal pre-K program, which is known as pre-K for all. And that's for children who are 4 years old. So for example, right now, today, all children enrolled in pre-K for all were born in 2013.
Right.
They're all going to kindergarten in September.
Mm-hmm.
For the next school year, starting in September 2017, children in pre-K will all be born in 2014.
Right.
That's it. It's rigid. It's pre-K right now is for 4-year-olds in New York City.
Right.
Since children age out of EI when they're 3, pre-K for all is not an option that first year out of early intervention. But parents should keep it in the back of their mind for the following year.
Yeah.
But there are other programs for 3-year-olds. Head Start, childcare, community nursery schools. So you should be exploring those options with your service coordinator and with other agencies and professionals and your neighbors. And find out where kids in your community tend to go to school and see what other options are out there. On our last slide, I think it's the very bottom link, there's a really great link to a great guide from Advocates for Children, which is their guide to public education programs for 3 and 4-year-olds. Okay. So you can click on that and they will describe what's available that might be at no cost to you.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that we think is really important to parents to note.
Okay, so notification. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering what that means. So Marilyn, can you talk a little bit about what notification means?
Notification is really interesting. It's in the federal law, and what notification is, it really is system to system. So what that is, you will be asked by your service coordinator, and it's very rigid when it's 150 days before your child is first potentially eligible. Okay, 150 days before, you will be asked to fill out a form saying that you will have the New York City Department of Health Early Intervention Program let the New York City Department of Education know that your child may be coming their way. Okay. It doesn't mean anything. But what's interesting about notification is this is the only part in this system where you have to sign something that says you want to opt out. If you don't sign the form, your child will be notified. They will notify. Okay. This is the only thing where the signature is to opt out in writing. Okay. If you're not sure, if you're thinking, this is happening, my kid is just 2, I'm not sure, you don't have to do the notification. You can still refer at a later date. I see it as really a heads up for the school district to know how many kids are coming their way in this foreseeable future so they could plan. Okay. If you would like more information, I think it's the next slide is the transition conference. I just want to go over that. Yes. So the transition conference is interesting because it's really designed for families. If you're unsure about the CPSE system, if you're unsure about preschool special ed, you don't know if you want a notification, you don't know if you want to refer, you want to know more, you can request that there be a transition conference. Your service coordinator will request the conference with the CPSE administrator in your school district and the EIOD, the Early Intervention Official Designate. This should happen absolutely no later than 90 days before your child is first eligible for preschool services, and really should be happening around the IFSP at your child's second birthday. There are other places you can get information if you don't feel that you need the transition conference. Okay.
But it's certainly good to know that this is an option for parents.
It's an option that I don't think parents exercise a lot in New York City.
I know I didn't, so this is...
Yeah, and I think it's a really hard one to schedule. There are so many meetings that people have to go to that an optional one often just doesn't happen. But you can always call an Early Childhood Direction Center or Advocates for Children or Include or Center Here or one of the other great resources that are out there to ask questions about transition as well. Okay. Okay, so.
Okay, referral. So whose responsibility is it to make this referral?
It's the parent's responsibility, okay?
That's an important one to know. It's your responsibility.
Absolutely.
As the parent.
And on my notes, it's double bolded and underlined because I want to say that. Your service coordinator, though, can help you with the referral. New York City EI uses a form designed by the New York State Department of Health that you can just fill out, and your service coordinator can help you fill that out, and they will take care of making that referral on your behalf. Okay. If you prefer, you can also write a letter on your own to the local committee on preschool special education referring your child. When to make the referral is something that you really need to figure out based on when you want your child to leave early intervention. Right. So it can be made as early as 100 calendar days before the child is first potentially age eligible for preschool special ed. And it absolutely has to be made no later than 90 calendar days before a child's third birthday. Okay. That's in the law and regulation, but that's the law for New York State. In New York City, our best guidance is it should be 120 days. Okay. It's a busy city. Things happen. There's a lot of kids moving through the system. So waiting till that 90 calendar days before your child's third birthday, to my thinking, doesn't ensure they'll be through the process by their third birthday. Right. Build that extra time in for when you get stuck on the subway on the way to the evaluation appointment.
You never know what could happen.
Right. You just build that extra time in.
Okay. So evaluation. So this is a very important part of this process. So after you send in your referral, the CPSE administrator immediately sends you, the parents, an evaluation information packet. And Marilyn's just going to show you.
So it has a lot of pieces in it. And you'll get your own once it's referred. One of the things I want to point out is that immediately is also one of the only times in this system where there's not a timeline.
Right.
So immediately, in my mind, is probably 2 days.
Right.
It might not be that quick. So the packet's quite thick. It has a referral form. It has a consent for evaluation, which I'm going to say right now is the one that you really need to pay the most attention to initially.
Right.
It has a medical form for you to fill out, and it has your procedural safeguards, which are actually about 40 pages.
Yes.
Right, we only have one page laminated today. Right. And there's also an evaluation site list that you can choose your evaluation site. But the list is also quite thick.
It's a lot, yes.
And we find that the list often is not as up to date because evaluation site, the person you need to talk to might not be the person on the list.
Right.
So what we would suggest you do is that contact the Early Childhood Direction Center. We're on the front page of that packet as a place to call. And of course, you can also contact the CPSE administrator to help you come up with appropriate evaluation sites. The list is quite long. It's not sorted by borough, it's alphabetical.
Right.
So we can talk to you about that.
Okay. I just want to point out too that as a parent, you have a choice on where your child is evaluated.
Right.
So Marilyn talks about the consent form, and I know, a lot of parents may be wondering, should they sign it before, should they sign it at the site? Can you talk a little bit about why parents should take the unsigned form?
Do not sign it.
Okay.
Number one, do not sign it, because that's a legal document. It's saying you consent for your child to be evaluated, and you also understand what your due process rights are.
Right.
Okay. So when you get the packet, what you should do is you should look for an evaluation site and call to make an appointment. It's your responsibility to choose the evaluation site. When you make that appointment, first of all, you're going to call and somebody might not have appointments for several weeks.
Right.
There's a clock ticking here. That might not be appropriate.
Right.
Your child might need to be evaluated in a language other than English. That evaluation site might not have the capacity to evaluate your child in that language. So you need to not decide who you want to evaluate your child until you know that they can do it. So you bring that with you to your first appointment, and that begins the clock ticking. You sign it after your due process rights have been explained to you, and then the evaluation site representative takes that form and sends it to the CPSE administrator, either by email or by fax. And that has a date on it, so that begins the clock ticking. Because from the time you sign that until the meeting to determine eligibility and develop the next plan of services is 60 calendar days. So it's 2 months.
2 months.
So it's really, really important.
So say a parent signs the form, are they able to withdraw their consent at any time?
Parent can withdraw their consent in writing at any time. This is a consent for an evaluation. It's not a consent for services.
Right.
So the parent can do it. I advise that it be done in writing and you keep a copy of the letter that you send.
All right. So what can parents expect when they get to the evaluation site?
Well, absolutely. The first part will be a review with you of your due process rights and ask you to sign that. Okay. Then they're going to do what's known as a social history, which is an interview with you, the parent, asking about your child's development and any information you want to share about your child, how long they've been receiving services, if they have a diagnosis, what your experiences with early intervention, anything that you think is important. There will be an individual psychological evaluation, and you will be asked to ask your medical provider, your child's pediatrician, to fill out a medical form. That medical form comes in the packet. So, little tip, if your child is currently getting EI services and they've had that form filled out, it's the same form for EI and it's less than a year old, you can submit that one. Okay. So you can ask them for that. Any other assessments that will be done to determine if your child meets the criteria of a preschool child with a disability. It can include a speech evaluation, an occupational therapy evaluation, a physical therapy evaluation. So those are the pretty much basic components, the main ones.
Okay. So the social history, I just want to talk a little bit about that. Try to keep track of your child's milestones because you're definitely going to be asked about them during the social history portion of the evaluation. And then Marilyn talked about, we have on this slide the FBA. In what case would a child need an FBA?
An FBA is a functional behavioral assessment.
Right.
And generally an FBA is done for a child who has very significant and severe behavior challenges that really impact all facets of their life, but for preschool, impacts their ability to learn. It's in the law, it's in the regulations, but I mean, historically, there are very few children who move from EI to preschool who have an FBA as part of their initial evaluation.
Okay.
Although if you feel that your child's behaviors are so intense that they need to have that FBA,
Right.
that's really important. So you need to ask for that.
Now, the evaluations, do parents have a right to copies of the evals before their meeting?
The parents should get a copy of the evaluations from the evaluation site. The evaluation site is required to send the parent what's known as an evaluation summary form that lists the child's strengths and areas of concern in the 5 different developmental domains that we talked about earlier.
Right.
Many evaluation sites, however, will actually sit down with parents and have what's known as an informing interview to go over all of the components of the evaluation and where they saw the child's strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
The evaluations will not make recommendations for specific services.
Okay.
They will say that the child has areas of concern that meet the criteria for preschool special education services.
Mm-hmm.
You should absolutely ask the evaluation site for their process for sharing the reports with you, and absolutely ask for copies. One thing I didn't mention before that I just remembered is that if you have current evaluations from your child
Right.
from an outside provider, if your child is getting private speech therapy, you can absolutely submit them to the evaluation site and they can determine if it meets the criteria for an evaluation, and then they could submit that one and not have to repeat the evaluation. Or if it doesn't meet the criteria, you can always bring it with you for your own information. Like your child might see a developmental pediatrician. That's not a required component. But if you have a report from a developmental pediatrician, you can absolutely add that in.
Okay. Alrighty. So now we have the Individualized Education Program, the IEP. So remember, when your child's in early intervention, they have an IFSP, Individualized Family Service Plan. Now that they're transitioning into preschool, they're going to have an IEP.
Okay. So an IEP, the meeting, that's the Committee on Preschool Special Education meeting. And that will happen 60 calendar days from when you sign consent. I just like to keep repeating that so parents are aware of the timelines. Right. And if a child meets the eligibility criteria, and I think on the next slide there is the eligibility criteria, however, it's the same as the eligibility criteria for early intervention. And that's very wordy, so I think people could just look at the slide on their own. Okay, so let's go back one. Just go back to that one. Okay, so what happens at the meeting? If your child meets the criteria, they're going to receive a classification of a preschool student with a disability. There'll be a description of your child's abilities and needs, and then goals and objectives to meet those needs and what the progress will be. And then there'll be recommendations for services and where they will be delivered, including a description of how services are offered in the LRE, what's known as the least restrictive environment.
So can you explain a little bit about what LRE means? I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think it's very important for parents to understand what LRE means.
LRE means, to what the extent possible, a child receives services with their typically developing peers. Okay. In EI, some of the parents might have heard the term natural environments.
Right.
This is the preschool and school-age term for natural environments. It's LRE. LRE is different for every child. For some children, an LRE, the least restrictive environment, might be a community-based neighborhood preschool or Head Start program, not pre-K for all at 3, but a neighborhood preschool program or nursery school or Head Start program where the child can have the services placed there. Okay. For another child, it might mean that their needs are such that they need to be in a program where a portion of the kids have a disability and other kids are typical development, and that's called a special class in an integrated setting.
Okay.
There's also a portion of children for whom this current next year, and this is only a plan for a year, their needs would be better met in a classroom where all of the children have a disability and have an IEP. And it really depends on the child's needs. And I want parents to remember that the plan is good for a year. But at any time, you as the parent can request that the IEP be reviewed.
Okay. Now, what happens if a parent cannot attend the meeting?
If a parent can not attend the meeting, and you will get notification about 5 days before the meeting. And for those of us who work, sometimes 5 days isn't really not enough time.
Right.
So, keep an eye on when that'll be, and you might want to reach out to the administrator and say, I'm working and I need to. I was just talking to a parent the other day who's pregnant and is due any minute, and I suggested she call to see if they could push the meeting up a little bit so that it wouldn't happen when she's otherwise busy.
Right. And one thing I encourage parents to do, if you're trying to change a date, give some alternate dates. Don't just say, I can't make this date. Give like 3 or 4 dates so they have something to work with when they're trying to reschedule.
So you should immediately contact the CPSE administrator, ask them to reschedule, as I said, as a date that works for you, giving them some choices.
Right.
But remember that the CPSE is a committee, and you as a parent, you're a mandated member of the committee.
Definitely.
We're going to go through the members in a second.
Right.
So while it's not ideal and we don't recommend it, worst case scenario, which is not terrible, is that you or other members of the committee can participate by telephone. So sometimes that's just
Sometimes
what
you
happens.
have no choice.
You
Right?
have no
just
choice.
have to do that.
The other thing is that I just want to let you know, you as a parent, you can bring anybody with you to the meeting.
Right.
Okay, and that's really important. Sometimes you're sitting in a meeting and it's really hard to take notes and to pay attention.
Right.
So bring somebody along that can really just take the notes for you.
Right.
And just be there as a support for you. We think it's a good idea.
And please let your CPSE administrator know who you're going to be bringing ahead of time so they're aware.
Right. So let's go to the members. I think that's probably the next
yeah.
slide. Right.
Yes.
So who are the members of the CPSE? Okay. Child's parent, we have
Definitely,
you first.
you're the first. You're the very important part of the team.
Okay, you want to go through that?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're the parent, and you're number one as a part of the committee. Then you have your CPSE administrator or the New York City Department of Education district rep, the special education teacher or provider. There's also the general education teacher or preschool teacher. Professional who can interpret evaluation, so this is usually a representative from the eval agency, and the early intervention service coordinator. If the parent agrees, you can ask a CPSE to invite an interpreter if needed, and you have to request this in advance. Now, I definitely encourage you to let your service coordinator know about this meeting so that they may be able to participate. If they cannot, if you're trying to bring anyone from outside in and they're not able to attend, they can participate by phone. Just make sure that you let your CPSE administrator know.
And I just want to say one thing about the service coordinator.
Right.
If you allow the service coordinator to help you with the initial referral
Right.
and use their form, on the bottom of the form, there's a checkbox that you can check off that says, please invite my service coordinator to the meeting.
Okay.
So that's really, that's
great.
important to know.
Right.
So make sure, but experience tells me that the notification comes by mail, and sometimes mail isn't as quick as possible. So as soon as you find the date, call your service coordinator and let them know the date, time, and location of the meeting.
Right.
And then there are some optional members.
So if you're going to invite a parent member, and this is a parent of a child with a disability just like you, that can come to your meeting and provide you with some support, please make this request in writing at least 72 hours before the meeting. The same goes for if you want to have a doctor participate as well. And you may be able to invite others to attend the meeting.
The physician generally would be invited if for a child who has very complex medical needs, who might need specialized transportation, who might need to have a nurse in school with them, who might be on a ventilator, who might have a trach. So it's really important that if your child has those very, very, very significant medical needs and you want the Department of Ed physician there, that you requested in writing, as Kpana said, 72 hours in advance. And you request that to the CPSE administrator.
Yes. Okay. Eligibility criteria.
This is the eligibility criteria, and it's the same as for early intervention. It's about a 12-month delay in one of the areas, or a 33% delay, or a 25% delay in two areas. It's important to note, though, that speech, receptive language, and expressive language count as one area.
Okay.
So a child might have a very significant expressive language delay, but might have very high receptive language skills. It has to average out.
Okay.
So that's important that parents note. In New York State, go back one, thanks. In New York State, for kids who are over age 5, there are specific criteria. So sometimes a child might meet that New York State classification for autism, deafness, deafblind, or one of the others. And other health impaired is one that I want to point out,
Right.
because there might be a child who has a significant medical condition that impacts their ability to learn. So they might not meet the criteria on the top half of this, but they might meet that criteria. That's something we can talk to you about individually in detail for families.
So is a child able to get the same services they were getting in EI in preschool special education?
Well, the services are different in preschool than early intervention. They might be some similar services, OT, PT, speech, terms that families are getting familiar with. But since EI services are mostly home-based, I want families to be aware that during those preschool, the 3 and 4-year-old years, services are most often provided in a center-based location where that child goes to school.
Right.
Okay? So it's whether it's a program where all of the children have special needs, or it's the community early childhood program that you've chosen for your child. During the meeting to develop the IEP, there will be a discussion of the types of supports and services and where they are. So if a child is recommended for related services, or perhaps special education itinerant services, which is where a teacher travels to a child, it would be up to you as the parent to find that early childhood program.
Okay.
But if the recommendation is for your child to attend a preschool special ed program, the CPSE administrator will make that recommendation and offer a placement for a child there.
Okay. So I just want to interject here a little bit and encourage you, if you have any questions about I know we've gone over a lot of material. If you have any questions, definitely use the chat box, send us a question, and so.
Or if a question occurs to you in the middle of the night,
Right.
then
Right.
email us afterwards,
Right.
and we're happy to address and call.
Right. So let's move
So
on.
I just want to again point out one thing, because I think parents in EI are very used to services delivered in a certain way. And in preschool special education, for the most part, the services are going to be offered not at home.
Okay.
And it's very, very rare that kids get both center-based and home-based services. And it's almost, I don't want this to become a sticking point during a meeting,
Right.
but I don't know if the CPSE administrator is able to actually authorize both types at the same time.
Right.
So you don't want that push and pull. Okay.
So Marilyn went over some of the services that your child can get in preschool special education, and this slide just kind of goes over some of those services.
And they're actually listed in what we talked about in LRE.
Right.
Going from the least restrictive to a more restrictive setting.
Right. Okay. So these are some more supports and services that your child can get. I just want to ask a question though. Under what conditions can a child getting related services only get transportation?
Okay, so in general, whenever related services are on a child's IEP, the CPSE administrator will look for a provider who can go into the location where the child is located. Okay, so if your child is going to ABC Head Start program on West 29th Street, the providers will come to your child there. In the occasion or in the instance where a provider cannot be found, the CPSE administrator will arrange for you to will arrange a location where you will then have to bring your child. If that happens, then it's up to you as the parent to have a conversation with the CPSE administrator about what the process is to reimburse you for your travel to that center and back.
Okay.
But if this therapist is traveling to your child, you don't get reimbursed.
Okay.
It's only for your expenses to transport your child.
Okay, so these are a lot of services. Who arranges for these services? Who pays for them?
Everything on an IEP is at no cost to the parent, okay? First term we talked about, free and appropriate public education, okay? So that's what that is. That's FAPE. So it's the CPSE administrator will arrange for the services to be provided at no cost to you. Okay.
I just want to point something out about 12-month services. It's always good. I mean, it's one thing, you know, you need as much documentation as you can from a doctor or outside provider that can support you saying that you think your child is going to need services during the summer because they may regress. So that's something that you want to keep in mind.
Yeah, and the term for that is extended school year, ESY, extended school year. And generally, the 12-month services, which is really a misnomer because it's not 12 months.
Yeah, because they do get breaks.
It's 30 days between July 1st and August and the end of August. So it's 30 school days, it's 6 weeks. So if your child will demonstrate a substantial regression without the summer services, then summer services will be provided. But if everybody is following our advice and saying we want most kids to start in September, sometimes you don't have enough documentation to say my child will regress. But as the school year goes on, after Christmas break, after this past week, you then can go back and have the child's IEP changed to a 12-month recommendation.
And this is something that I really want parents to be aware of because this happens often because you might go to the meeting and they'll say, well, you know, there's not enough evidence to prove that your child's going to regress. So just know that all isn't lost. You can always wait until maybe after the Christmas break, as Marilyn mentioned, and then that can be brought up again.
You know, it's hard to say a child will regress if you withhold services. So, you know, it becomes this dance. So that's the other thing. On the other supports and services, I just want to bring attention to the last one, which is the Behavior Intervention Plan, which is known as the BIP. Children can only get a BIP if they've had the FBA, if they've had the Functional Behavioral Assessment. I know, I think we never talk in plain English in this
Everything
business.
has an acronym.
So you can get, so if that's something that at some point you might say, you know, I'm really concerned about some of my child's behavior. So if during the school year, you know, October, you're hearing from the teachers that the behaviors are really tough and he's having a hard time, or it's hard for other kids to be educated because one child in the classroom is making it hard, you can go back and ask for a functional behavior assessment during the school year, and then a BIP can be developed.
And that should be indicated on the IEP once it's completed.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's keep moving on. So as we mentioned before, the CPSE administrator is responsible for arranging all of the services, and these services should start as soon as possible following the IEP meeting, but no later than 60 school days from the date that you sign the consent for evaluation. So when you sign that consent, it's very important.
Right. So mark it in your calendar.
Yes.
I mean, we always say that in kind of plain English, 60 school days is about 3 months. Okay, so it's 3 months. So it's really, really important then that you have this conversation about if your child is transitioning from early intervention and you want your child to stay in EI until that last age out date we talked about earlier, that's what the date will be. If you are even though it says no later than 60 school days, let's just say your child is born in December and you decide that you want your child to transition for September. So you're having the meeting about now, right? Maybe a little bit later in the year, it's mid-April. Let's just say you're having the meeting in June, okay? 60 school days from when you sign consent is going to be well before September when school starts. So you just want the date to say, I'm staying in EI till longer, and the projected date will be when. So parents need to understand that piece of it. So I just want to talk about this for a minute. If your child is going to stay in EI past their 3rd birthday, there's a form that needs to be filled out. There's a form for everything. There's a form for this, and that's called the DEP-1 form. And I was racking my brain what it meant, and I think it's the Determination of Eligibility for Preschool form, because it was just first designed so many years ago. But the DEP-1 form, That's a Department of Education form. It's not an early intervention form. That form is generated at the IEP meeting after a child is eligible. And what it says is, yes, my child is eligible. I would like to extend the early intervention services till the age out date. And then your service coordinator takes that form, brings it back to early intervention, and then authorizes the extension. So that's another reason why it's really important to have your service coordinator there.
Okay. So we've discussed a lot today, right? But what can parents do if their child does not meet the criteria for preschool special ed, but they feel like their child needs help?
Okay, so two things. If they feel their child didn't meet the criteria and they also feel that the evaluations perhaps did not capture who their child was and wasn't accurate, what my suggestion would be is then they can ask the CPSE administrator to authorize an independent evaluation. Sometimes it's just one evaluation. You know, maybe that OT, the occupational therapy evaluation, maybe it wasn't such a great evaluation and the child has many sensory issues, but that OT was only looking at fine motor.
Right.
I'm just making something up here, right?
Right.
So then you can ask for that evaluation. If a child doesn't meet the criteria, that means they don't have enough of a delay to warrant services. But sometimes kids still would benefit from an intervention. So in that case, I would really suggest that you look at your insurance, you look for other places to get some of those services for your child. Have the conversation with your pediatrician. Okay? There are other ways. There are clinics that are at low cost, sliding scale, but that's a really important piece of it.
Okay. And if you're looking for referrals to any sites that provide evals, definitely call our helpline. I'm going to share that information with you shortly.
And the other piece that I think it's really, really important is that sometimes when kids get into preschool, just being around other children gives them a jump start on language.
Yes.
So sometimes you might want to wait a little while and see how they do, but not wait too long. You can always ask for another evaluation at a later date if your child is not eligible. You can go back and ask.
Okay. So now we have some advocacy tips that we want to share.
So these are really, really basic, and in your packet, INCLUDEnyc has others that are more, I don't want to say aggressive, more assertive.
Right.
Okay, but these are just what I want to say. And I always get this funny moment when I do this where my mother comes into my body and I say something that I would never think I would say, which is, you get much more with honey than with vinegar.
Definitely.
So be polite, okay? Even though sometimes it's a real stretch to be polite, but be polite, okay? Start off polite.
Start off at least.
Start off polite. Be persistent. Keep really careful records. You think you're going to remember who you spoke to.
You need to write it down.
And who said what, but you're not. You need to write it down. Be really aware of timelines. Do not be afraid to go up the chain of command if necessary. Like we said earlier, everybody has a boss. There's nothing wrong with saying the first time you meet with the evaluation site, okay, so you're my primary contact. If I can't reach you, who can I call?
Who can I reach, right.
Okay, write it down. Keep careful records. And always, always remember that you are a valued and required member of the Committee on Preschool Special Education. You as the parent have as much say as anybody else.
You know your child best.
And you need to remember that sometimes it's intimidating sitting in a room of professionals, but I think parents coming out of EI are used to having a voice.
Right.
And use that voice. So I think that's really important.
Definitely. So we're pretty much at the end here. I know I talked about the helpline card. I just want to share it with everyone. So this is the INCLUDEnyc helpline card. You can definitely call us. The number is 212-677-4660. Definitely call us if you need any help or if you have any questions about anything that was discussed today. And Marilyn's going to share.
Can you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
I think. Let's see.
Yes.
Okay, so that's information about the Early Childhood Direction Centers. And go to the next slide. Great. And there's an ECDC in each of the 5 boroughs. And you're welcome to contact me about if you want clarification in something general. But go to the ECDC in your borough. Here's our card. Just, I don't want to be competitive, but we each have a card. But contact an Early Childhood Direction Center if you have any type of question about services for your child. And No concern is ever too small. A little concern becomes a bigger problem if you don't address it.
Definitely.
So call us. We're old-fashioned. We actually answer our phones.
Yes.
And
so do we.
We both do. And we return calls within a day, if not sooner. We also put some links on this page of places that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
And on the next page, we have links to resources that you can contact. I know the URLs are quite long. I'm a big proponent of Advocates for Children materials. They have really wonderful materials on their website. So if you just Google Advocates for Children and Early Childhood, you get a list of all of their documents, and their stuff is just absolutely terrific and available in several languages.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining in. This was definitely an experience. I just want to let you know that our next live stream is going to be, thanks Ms. Campbell, thank you for joining us. So our next live stream is going to be May 18th, and it's going to discuss how to get assistive technology on your child's IEP. I know this is something a lot of parents wonder about, so you definitely want to tune in. And I just want to thank everyone again for tuning in to INCLUDEnyc Live, real conversations on parenting and disability.